welcome to this AE Basics tutorial in which we're looking at text animators. And I've got one line of text here, and what we actually want to look at this time is the one that says right at the top, animate, enable per character 3D. But before I do that, I just want you to see that in the timeline I just have text. These are the options that I've got in normal transforms. Okay, so those are the bits and pieces I have in it at the moment. Now if I now go to animate, enable per character 3D, suddenly things change a bit. And let me just show you what's changed. I've got a little tab at the bottom that says material options, which we'll look at when we get to 3D, which we're not going to look at now. So when we get to 3D layers and everything, we can have a look at that. But notice under transforms I've got additional properties. I've got X and Y for anchor point and X and Y for position, but I've also got Z, so I can go backwards and forwards. And I've got what's called a gizmo on screen. Just pull this down so you can see it a bit more clearly. A gizmo. Yes, that's its actual word, and it's got a Z, which is the blue arrow, which is coming straight towards us for backwards and forwards. Y, which is the green arrow up and down, and Z, left and right, is the red arrow. And this red, green, blue item is actually called a gizmo. So I've got that. The transforms have changed, but actually, do you know what? I don't think that's going to help me with the text animation. Admittedly, if I was to say rotate round X and click X and rotate, the whole thing's going to rotate, which is pretty cool for the actual layer. I'm going to right click on it and reset. But actually that's not what we're going to be using. That's just showing you that it's become a 3D layer. And you've got a little box here that's created, and it's got two little squares in it, which is telling us that we've got something more than just 3D, because we have the ability to be able to animate per character. Okay, but at the moment I've got more options, and well, it's telling me about group alignment per character, and I can change to word, line and all. Okay, that's interesting, but I haven't got anything much I can animate at the moment. I can animate the grouping alignment, but that's not going to see any changes. No, we still need to go back in and actually add an animator to be able to see this in operation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click animate again, and I'm going to go up to, say, rotation. So click on rotation, and there's rotation, and you'll see that I can rotate around X and Y and Z. And if we open up the range selector and click start, you'll see that we've got the same range, and I can now start to pull around. Say if we rotate around the Y, we'll see it going sort of sideways towards. So rotate around the Y, and all of the characters are rotating together. So they're all rotating. Okay, so you'll see that they're rotating in a way that wouldn't have been possible without this 3D enabling. And so I can still go in and rotate around X, so I can have the characters coming towards me, as well as rotating around Y and the way that they're looking. Z, incidentally, is just going to kind of wrap it around itself, which is quite fun. So you have the ability to work with all of these individual characters and, of course, select the range. So if I take end to the beginning, and you'll see that we've just got that one character applied it to. There we go. Now if I play with my offset, I can have the characters one by one doing a little bit of rotating in quite an interesting and different way, because they're all rotating in 3D space as opposed to just 2D space. And of course you can apply this to anything that will look at X, Y and Z. So you've got scale in X, Y and Z, but scale in Z isn't going to work in quite the way you think. So if we go to add property scale, you'll notice that we do have Z, but if I unlock the 3 and I do scale Z, and let's just take this end back to 100% so everything's completely included, I start to scale, you're not going to see any changes. It's not going to give us any depth, which is sometimes what people want. So let's reset this offset as well. We can scale in X and we can scale in Y independently, but sometimes you might think, oh great, I can have deep characters. That's not what you're going to get. Even though you appear to have the Z option there, you're not going to be able to get depth. This is not the way to be able to do that. But you can, of course, animate position. So if I go to position, you'll see that we've got X, Y and Z, and when we go to position we can move everything back in space and forward in space. It kind of looks almost like scaling, but we are actually pulling it backwards and forwards in space. And so you can get some really interesting and fun looks simply by playing with that option that we had right at the top there, which is enable per character 3D. And then you have the option to anything that has 3D, of course, but without the option to use scale, which isn't going to give us what we want. And of course you can carry on adding. We've got all kinds of bits and pieces. We can add blur as we've done before, and that's just an X and Y. That's not going to go Z space. But even so, we can still play with these bits and pieces and get some really interesting and fun looks. Okay, so that's bringing all these bits and pieces together so you can see all the different animators. Have a play with them. There's an awful lot you can do with text. Plus, there's an awful lot more that we can add. Now, I'm just going to show you one thing. At the moment, we've got no animation, so let me just perhaps add a little bit of animation into here. So I'm just going to animate, say, the rotation. So if I go for my Y rotation and go to 3 seconds and just change that to 3 rotations. Okay, so at the moment I've got a little bit of animation going on like this, and that's very uniform. Just want to show you one of the additional selectors that we've got. If we go to add for this particular animator, we've always looked at properties. There are selectors. Now there is a range selector you can add and an expression selector. I'm not going to cover those at the moment. I'm going to go to the Wiggly Selector, and look what it's done to the text. And when I hit the spacebar, you'll see that everything wiggles or scales. We must have scale in here at some stage. Yes, we've been playing with scale as well, haven't we? So everything is sort of scaling and rotating in a kind of a random way. And what the Wiggly is doing, the Wiggly Selector, and if I open up the Wiggly Selector, it's decided that twice a second it's going to change all of these items in a random way. Now, the key here is correlation. If I take correlation up to 100%, you'll see that pretty much everything is scaling and twisting together, even though it's in a random way. But if I take correlation down to 0, everything's completely independent and, well, kind of anarchy, really. So correlation is how correlated, how together everything is. Its default setting is 50%, and the number of times a second it happens is to do here with the wiggles per second. So we can take that down to 0.5 if we like, and then it will only have one complete wiggle every 2 seconds. So it's not going to do anything like as much as it had done before. Okay, so the Wiggly Selector is a great fun thing to add. I'm not going to go into all the details at the moment, but if you've done an animation, it all looks very uniform, and you want something to be a little bit more fun, stick on a Wiggly Selector, and bear in mind, of course, you don't have to affect everything. You can just affect a little bit, and that little bit can be affected because you've selected the range that's actually going to work. Now, the last thing that I said I was going to show you at this particular point was that sometimes when you pull these things through, you don't get everything being affected at quite the same way. Now obviously we've got here spaces, so if you remember we have the advanced option here for spaces. Let's open up advanced, characters, and let's say excluding spaces. Okay, so when I pull the range through, you'll see that the characters exclude the spaces. So we've played around with those bits and pieces, but I'm going to show you how to make these items pop on, and the kind of different options we have to make them come on gradually or just in one quick go in the next tutorial. My name's Andrew Davis, and thank you for watching.